Wow. Be killed by the Archdemon or sleep with Morrigan. How does someone make that kind of choice?
Do you ever miss the old Bioware? You know, the one that had that incredible run of Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, Mass Effect, and Dragon Age Origins that established a whole new subgenre of RPG. Since then, nearly everybody who made those games has left the studio, and Bioware's become more of a figurehead representing past glories than a real innovator in the space. Dragon Age Inquisition's, pretty good if you don't participate in all of its bloat, and I guess Andromeda's got a good heart buried beneath all its rehashed series tropes, but these games feel like franchise upkeep more than essential entries. And I won't bore you with how Anthem was received, or whatever the hell this is.
Gosh, something wrong here.
Bioware just doesn't make them quite like they used to. It just doesn't quite feel like home. You say you can't go home again, then maybe that's all for these types of games. But what if I told you that someone had moved into that old metaphorical RPG house that Bioware built and was trying to keep the place up? Enter spiders. No, not the little guys that crawl all over the place when everyone's moved out. I'm talking about the French game studio. Spiders has had the dream of resurrecting the old Bioware magic since the late aughts, and has been making it happen with a AA budget, no less. Spiders initially made their bones porting games to major consoles, but soon got into the headliner space with ropey but ambitious RPGs like Fairy Legends of Avalon, Of Orcs and Men alongside Cyanide, Mars Warlogs, Bound by Flame, and The Technomancer. Now, all of these are broken in some form or fashion, but the light of potential shone brightly through their cracks, promising that one day, Spiders would reach their potential. In 2019, Spiders finally broke through with Greedfall. When I finally got around to playing Greedfall in 2022, I felt like I'd been thrown back in time to the golden age of Bioware. Much like KOTOR, Mass Effect, and Dragon Age, Greedfall's world is full of curated, semi-open levels joined together by fast travel. Leveling up your skills isn't just about making damage numbers go up, but are accompanied by vibrant animations, effects, and feedback that sell your growing power and offer a surprising amount of build depth. You'll travel with a colorful cast of companions to romance and perform special tasks with that reveal their backstory. And of course, all of this is wrapped around a compelling, epic main quest that elegantly interweaves with the side missions, all in classic Bioware style. But Greedfall's setting is truly original and takes them beyond just being a worthy imitator of Bioware's old style. Greedfall's world is a rich pastiche of the Age of Exploration or the Age of Discovery, a real-life period of history between the 15th to 17th centuries, which saw explorers from the Catholic Church, the East India trading companies, and other parts of Europe who sailed across the world to establish new trade, make incredible advancements in navigational and nautical technology, chart maps, exchange cultural artifacts, and often evangelize people to Christianity. Now, much like the real time period, Greedfall's also about the firestorm that goes off when cultures of deeply held beliefs start to encroach on each other's territory.
Colonialism.
Oh, big topic.
Not only do we have the classical geographical and religious conflicts between natives and the religious colonizers of Ptolemy, but we also see a classic battle between the Ptolemy religion and the brutal naturalist faction called the Bridge Alliance, who values science and intellectual progress above all else. Quest writing gets a bit wordy, but it's always invested in spelling out all the motivations and showing you all the different permutations of human nature that make this world so fascinating. The world's ingredients really seem to dictate the recipe instead of the recipe dictating what ingredients needed to exist. It's all very epic and fleshed out, but feels organic. Let's get into all these ingredients and see how Spiders managed to not only resurrect that special feeling that old Bioware RPGs used to have, but to make their own unique mark on the genre in the modern day. Let's get stuck in and see why I've fallen in love with this 2019 masterpiece. Alright, well, for those of you who are still around after that horrendous pun, let's address the elephant in the room first. Greedfall is a game that looks like it's made in 2019, but also 2012. The facial animations can look pretty crinkly. The stealth animation looks like someone flopping a plastic spider around at times, no pun intended. And so many of the building interiors and towns are repeated, to the point where you can start guessing where objectives are based on how well you know the floor plan, and where those types of objectives have been in every other town. But even if you're a fidelity snob, there's quite a bit here for you, and I wouldn't let these AA budgetary constraints cause you to miss out on the splendor everywhere else in the game. Wilderness and city environments alike still evoke wonder with loads of bespoke detail and an often epic sense of composition and scale. The splendor of the underground caves, or the moody swamps, or seeing the sun peeking out is singularly impressive. There's a sense of old-world adventure around every corner, tri-corner hats and seagull-infested harbors, flintlock pistols and blunderbusses at your side, and all the accoutrements of this time period in this world just begging you to take part. There's scope but also specificity to it all. It shows that Spiders knew their limitations and decided to wring every last inch of atmosphere and authenticity that they could out of the limited assets their scanty $3 to $5 million budget and their 40 to 50 person team could afford. They've really done more with less here, and the environments and art direction prove that good ideas and attention to detail beat fidelity any old day. Now, not only does the game look pretty good despite some budget constraints, but the music and the voice acting enrich the experience tenfold. The big test of an RPG for me is how good it feels to just simply travel through.
The Donegat who performed the ritual was the villagers. We should go talk to Dedra.
And if you know your French video game composers, you can probably guess who did Greedfall's score. That's right, the one and only Olivier de Rivière. This guy is a master. I've been a huge fan of his compositions for some time now, having first encountered him in games like Alone in the Dark 2008 or Plague Tale Innocence. Greedfall's soundtrack is a welcome departure, though, from what I'm used to hearing from him. Instead of the dark moodiness, we hear a lot of tribal elements like flutes, rattles, and crashing percussion that take center stage because, well, of the game's tribal themes. But we also call to mind the classic Catholic origins of Thélème in the organs in Farewell Mother and the horns of Fallen Hope. I also can't overstate how classical and uniquely pitched the soundtrack is. It just swells up with adventure and intrigue and makes you feel alive, but it's not afraid to underscore absolutely heartbreaking moments and moments of horror. For instance, the main theme sounds triumphant at first, but it has this strange constriction to its joy as if we're being asked to consider what this triumph cost in terms of human suffering. Was it all worth it is a question that the game asks of every character. And speaking of our characters, let's get into how they're characterized and voice acted. The facial animations and models can look dated, as we've said, but Greedfall's committed voice cast more than makes up for this lack of fidelity. I can't remember a bad performance in the whole cast. Every supporting character feels like they're in the moment, and they're not just cheap talent hired to fill in the actions around the characters we really care about. I also can't overstate how cool it is that Spiders created a new language for the natives of Tier 4D, which has elements of Welsh, Irish, Dutch, and likely many other influences.
You are an Onolmanawi now, Johan, and soon you will heal the earth by our sides, like a real Donegat.
Thank you, Donkas. I feel so proud.
I am so happy that we can be Voglendaiga together at last.
This attention to detail and quality makes the main quest and the companion quest really sing because the world feels like it matters to itself and isn't just strung together to appease the player's ego. And speaking of the player, you play as Desarde, a legate or diplomat of the Congregation of Merchants, as Desarde is very keen to say almost every time they meet someone new.
Desarde, niece of the Prince d'Orsay and legate of the Congregation of Merchants. My name is Desarde. I'm the legate of the Merchant Congregation. My name is Desarde. I'm the legate of the Merchant Congregation.
I am...
Desarde, legate of the Merchant Congregation, right?
well...
And when I play Desarde, I'm talking specifically Femme Desarde, because let's be honest, the woman's always the better singer in duets, and the female voice actor is almost always better than the male one in these types of games. See the OG Jennifer Hale as Femme Shep, Cassandra in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Laura Bailey in Saints Row III, or the female protagonist in Hogwarts Legacy and Marvel's Midnight Suns. I don't make the rules, that's just how it is.
So I play Lady Desarde, who is the legate of the congregation, the Merchant Congregation.
Desarde's female voice actress is Cassie Layton, and it'd be so easy to just write her off as posh English voice actor number 3000, but she plays Desarde with a soulful sense of empathetic conviction. She's never singular enough to quite feel like a fully rounded character, and some scenes give her almost zero facial reaction to even the most harrowing situations happening right in front of her, but she's just enough of an emotional guide for the player to care. But like most Bioware-style RPGs, the real rubber meets the road moment for characterization is how well your companions enrich the journey. They're mostly likable and interesting folks who are pulled from various walks of life to represent the core conflicts of the world and to add convenient insights into the different cultural characteristics. Sora is a native passionately fighting for freedom for her people while making sure that she doesn't succumb to the same hatred she says she's fighting. Petrus is a kind-hearted bishop of Thélème who has to manage his own sense of duty against his Inquisition comrades' harsh excess. Afra is a member of the Bridge Alliance, who's often guilty of being mad scientist intent on conquest, even possibly being linked to the Malachor curse which we're hoping to cure throughout the game. Vasco's part of an influential sailor faction called the Knots that engage in most of the major trade routes, but they draw most of their recruits from rich families who sell off their children for favorable business deals in the future. It's a hard knot life. Okay, I'm pretty proud of that one. I just came up with that on the spot. Greedfall's world is just full of all these factions that have nuanced problems with each other, and they can explode into righteous indignation at the drop of a tricorner hat. It's a lot like life. Not every major problem can just be ended by convenient writing or force of will. Some battles you can't win, some you can, but at what cost? These considerations inform every action that you as a diplomat engage in, and you're being asked to at least headcanon why this matters even if many quest lines are fairly linear or binary. Spiders adheres to the Bioware formula for quest completion almost to a fault here. Greedfall is definitely a different RPG than, say, Fallout New Vegas or The Witcher 1, where anything but the major ending choices diverge greatly. Greedfall's player inflection and quest completion means that you're often deciding which faction is more in the right, and thus is the one you want to help, knowing that you lose points with another faction and that may matter down the line. On a more micro level, quest dialogue is riddled with contextual dialogue that can be passed or failed based on relevant skill checks. But even if the quest lines don't branch much, the linear drama is almost always compelling in and of itself, and so you'll still be excited to find out more about how the world works and about how the short stories end. You know, how to help wildly different factions work together, and come what may after you try to do the right thing. Desarde is a diplomat, as we've said, and while mine killed her fair share of guys, smooth talking and bartering of information was often a weapon of choice as well. And speaking of weapons, when talking will get you nowhere, Greedfall's real-time third-person combat will get your opponent's entrails everywhere. Spider's previous games have had notoriously bad combat, and I distinctly remember how floppy the Technomancer felt, but Greedfall is a huge step up for the studio's combat depth and feel. Now, how you fight is determined, of course, by your class, and those classes are divided up into 3 main tiers, but they're more like starting points than distinct paths. And these 3 tiers or classes are Warrior, Technical, and Magic. Warrior skills focus on melee, buffs, dodge rolls, and occasionally guns as backup. Technician builds focus primarily on guns and traps, and even throwable explosives that deal magic or poison damage. The mage can fire shadowy blast or teleport in a shadowy burst of energy, and they also get some powerful lockdown spells like stasis, which is coincidentally also Dragon Age Origins' best magic spell too. You start off with 2 weapon slots and several mappable slots for potions or spells or abilities as they're unlocked. All melee fighting has a dodge and a parry, and every character has an armor rating that can be worn down either by just repeated damage from melee attacks or by being blasted down by guns, opening them up to receiving much more damage thereafter. But the same goes for you too, so you've got to be pretty careful about how you build your Desarde. While you start off in one of those 3 main class archetypes, the skill, attribute, and talent trees determine how your character actually functions. Skills have 2 branches per each class, which loop back to the class's ultimate at the endpoint. This means that you need to read ahead to see if the abilities down the tree are actually something you want to build towards. And you can strategically go halfway down a tree and then jump to the other branch and go all the way down it to get to the ultimate if you'd like. That helps you build the most effective warrior, or just the one that you prefer to play as. Your warrior can be an evasive backstabber or 2-handed weapon bruiser. Your technician can wield traps and guns, and your magician can try to supplement melee attacks with AoE and teleport dashes, or you can spec the other way and be an evasive healer who freezes enemies with stasis. You're never locked into one hard and fast build, which is great, and that means you can get a little creative. But just know that the sheer effectiveness of the abilities that you pick are going to be enhanced greatly by focusing on the relevant and more traditional attributes like strength, agility, and endurance for your melee fighter, or willpower and mental power for the mage. So while everything's interconnected in these character trees, you are encouraged to have a build and a half or maybe 2.5 builds pretty much the whole game. To give you some examples of this versatility, my first playthrough I was a magically enhanced melee fighter of sorts who eventually spec'd into guns because so many late game bosses made me keep my distance, and the guns do so much damage. I tried to spec completely into traps and guns on my second playthrough as I left the technician tree mostly alone, but I found that the economy of the game was far too restrictive to be able to constantly buy ammo and trap parts for every fight, and so I re-rolled my character to focus on magic and guns and then spec'd into traps and bombs later for shiggles. And after level 20, you can essentially start free-rolling random additions to your character outside of their main specializations, and that can really come in handy in niche situations. For instance, at level 29, I was high on mental power, willpower, and accuracy, the first two of which apply to my magic capabilities and accuracy letting me use guns and then eventually rifles. And so I was blowing enemy armor off with my guns so that my companions could deal direct damage, and then finished off the fight firing my guns whenever my magic would run out or I just didn't want to refill my magic pool with a potion. And because bosses drop respec crystals, you can often have multiple rerolls that you can try out totally different builds on the fly, often essentially playing as several different characters in the same playthrough. And I really admire that Greedfall wasn't greedy about making you replay the whole game every time you wanted the different experience. That's just a really nice consideration for time that most studios just don't even allow for. That said, as much build diversity as there is, Magic really is by far and away the best class style, and it's not really that close in my experience. Traps and bombs honestly cost too much to keep stock and just really don't seem to do enough damage, and often don't trigger unless an enemy walks just right over them, which is not something that you can rely on in the extremely tough boss sections at the end of the game. It also means that you're having to dodge constantly to get a hit or two in because enemies dogpile you in groups, and they often spam projectiles when they're not doing that. Magic damage is fast, highly damaging, and completely ignores the enemy armor ratings, doing direct damage to their health, which means you can circumvent the awkward dodge and parrying shit that the other classes have to worry about. I was kind of amazed at how trash the tech tree was except as a support skill, and soon the incredible gun abilities became the 1-2 punch of my Mystic Gunslinger build. Even speccing into traps and bombs at level 29 with high accuracy and all that did nothing to make them particularly effective outside of the tech ultimate called Bomb, which looks really cool popping off this charged shot into the air and then watching it obliterate mobs in the final boss with copious poison damage. And if that wasn't fun enough, you've actually got the ability in certain situations to sneak up on your opponents and stab the hell out of them. Or you can also use disguises. So overall, the combat is full of flair and great visuals from your explosive bombs or spells going off, and it's so fun to start getting overpowered even on the hardest extreme difficulty, and you just start feeling like you're getting to live out the power fantasy that most games don't allow for, either in terms of build variety or in your respecking potential. And last but not least, before we leave combat, let's talk about the enemy roster. I mean, you get to fight some generic human highwayman types that tend to just sort of whack you a lot or cheap shot you with guns from off screen, but generally speaking, you're fighting the werewolf, bears, and dinosaur-like creatures that often attack in droves and can poison you or just knock you out with a clean swipe of their tail. Most eventually become trivial by the end game, but they're all rather ferocious if they stay around for a bit. I would say that the only really egregious offender are the bats, which can shoot poison damage from afar and are really hard to hit because they're flying around and aren't actually moored to the ground. They're pretty indicative of how Spider's combat has fallen apart in the past, where the enemies are just way too capable and the combat is a little too floppy to keep up with them. So it's a little unfortunate that they're still here, but generally speaking, the enemies are fun enough to fight and they all look great. The real draws here, though, are the Guardians, which are these nature-powered bosses who look like Lovecraftian monsters or Aztec gods. They're just fantastic to look at and really fearsome to fight. I will say that they are way too spongy and made all the more egregious by the fact that many of them have one-hit kills with some very wonky hitboxes. It's like the more it looks like they hit you, they miss, and the more it looks like you're well clear of their ability, the more you get tagged with the edge of their hitbox. These boss fights are often thrilling and full of spectacle though, and they have great art design and really feel like the most original and interesting piece of lore on the island. But they are a mixed bag to fight, feeling either totally outmatched by the player after a while, or almost obnoxiously unfair. And I guess now is as good a time as any to change gears for a sec and chronicle what else the game does to make the experience drag or become frustrating. As good as some places look, there is a lot of repetition in interiors. You know, if you've been in one throne room or tavern, you've been in them all, regardless of how different the faction inside them is. There are also some graphical oddities like shadows moving all around or cutscene camera angles bugging out. Subtitles also have a fair amount of misspellings in them too. Quite a few quests are drawn out far longer than they need to be. An easy 8 to 10 hours of this game's mindless back and forth just walking across empty space could have been cut, as well as some rather redundant quests, as many require you to ask the natives for help and do all these side objectives to gather things or find missing people before getting back to the main task at hand. Some objectives, like this funeral quest, inexplicably didn't have any campsites nearby to go craft things that I needed only for this quest and would never have known to make before I got here, so it's pretty obnoxious that I had to travel several real-world minutes both ways to make them and then come back. And don't even get me started on how many paths in the game are incredibly hard to figure out how to get to and what level of terrain your objective is on. Some are even blocked off for no reason. Lastly, as far as quests go, there's also a comical reliance on characters leaving extremely incriminating documents lying around that you can use to break open investigations that you never would have figured out otherwise. It's one thing to make a game have a simple kind of wish fulfillment way to solve a problem. This comes up so many times that it feels like the villains in action movies conveniently revealing their plans to the good guy. There's even a scene where the Mother Cardinal, which is the highest Ptolemy official there can be, who just lets me walk out of her throne room into her study right to the left of her and then steal incriminating documents to persuade her to see it our way. It's like, come on, man. There's game logic and then there's just outrageous contrivance. Now, as far as gameplay goes, combat can be really fun, but can also be really frustrating. Greedfall just requires an excessive amount of dodging depending on your class because enemies spam projectile attacks, and the guardian bosses can close the distance fast and deliver massive one-hit kills. Indoors, the combat can be really trial and error, as sometimes you can die in 1 or 2 hits, or you keep trying to dodge and you keep being stuck on furniture, or the camera not being able to keep up with where you are in the room, and you can often get killed by things off screen, or things you never would have been able to prepare for. There's also a lot of input lag and slow animations that'll get you killed more often than not because, you couldn't stasis an enemy in time to keep them from deliver the killing blow, or you couldn't drink a potion when you clicked the button 7 times and nothing happened. Let's also not forget your companions. They don't seem to level up at all, and are often stuck at low tiers of skills and can't hold much better equipment throughout the game before they kind of hit their ability cap. And they're nearly useless in combat. They get killed very fast, very often, so reviving them with a potion isn't even that enticing of a proposition most of the time, as it will only buy you a little bit of time. Unlike old Bioware games where you could micromanage everybody's actions, you can only control your own, and your companions aren't stupid necessarily, but they are ineffectual, especially when they stand still like Afra did one time where she's facing the opposite direction of the enemy while blocking my magic shots. Thanks, m'lady. So yeah, those are the problems I have with Greedfall. But just to kind of get things back on a positive track, let's look at this romance scene, which is so bad it's good. If you do all of a companion's quest and chat them up, you can bang. But just look at how crazy this looks. Where they're in full armor, it looks like Desarde breaks Vasco's arm and throws him down on the bed after clipping through his face in what I can only assume was supposed to approximate a passionate kiss. Ugh. It's just nightmarish and utterly hilarious. But yeah, man, that's the extent of my quibbles with Greedfall. These quibbles can be highly frustrating, but the overall package is generally pretty fun. It's full of build diversity, has a lot of great quests, and many of which I don't want to spoil for the average person, hence why I kept this review as more of a recommendation than a retrospective tell-all. So while the ending isn't terribly strong outside of an easy but very cool feeling boss fight with a new monster, I do think that the journey here is utterly unoriginal and unforgettable. I mean, I played this game over 2 years ago, and it feels like just yesterday. That's how much it stuck with me. And the good news is that a lot of other people felt the same way, as Greedfall has sold 2 million copies, and a sequel was announced not too long ago called Greedfall 2: The Dying World. Weirdly enough, this game isn't the aftermath of the game's epic conclusion, but a prequel of all things, where you play as a native of Tier 4D. And if that wasn't unique enough, Greedfall 2 is also an early access title on PC, where they'll be staggering out the release on the major consoles too over the next several months. This is a pretty strange strategy, and I'm curious why the studio is working this way, but I'm mostly just glad that this game exists. I really hope this early access thing works out for them. And as of the day that I'm recording this script, I just got sent an early access code for Greedfall 2. I was not expecting that in a million years, so I am really excited to get in there, try and provide some feedback, and also a little preview video of what I've discovered in my time with the early build of the game. So I hope you're excited for that, because I definitely am. But yeah, man, the original game is one of the most, original RPGs that I've ever played. Its iconography and lore and writing are so detailed and rich, and are only slightly tempered by budgetary constraints, where there's a lot of repetitive tasks that ask you to backtrack a lot and fight tons and tons of mobs and the same bosses over and over. Thankfully, though, the combat's easily the best that Spider's ever put out, despite a wonky camera and laggy inputs dragging it down at times. There's just a ton of build diversity, as you can often get several different major class archetypes that overlap in interesting ways, and a ton of respec crystals so you can remix at will and get wildly different experiences all in the same playthrough as you desire. Spider's just paid so much attention to the natives' language and customs and lore, and the island just comes alive with fascinating creature designs and quest writing that plays up all the juicy conflicts between religion, science, culture, and morality. There's just the sense that Spider's just seems to care more than the average studio does about recapturing the glory days of Bioware, but also planting their flag in this territory to claim it as their own from here on out, which is very appropriate in a series about colonialism.
Colonialism.
Oh, big topic.
I hope this video gave you just enough to go on so that you'll go try it out and be swept away by a sense of wonder and discovery just as I have. Bioware may not be the same, but Spiders and Greedfall are here to wipe your tears away and make you forget all about that. So, till the next time we're together for Tear for D and Greedfall 2, thanks for watching. Before I go, I'd like to give a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by becoming a patron. Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Halcyon Loon, Hey Blondie, Hey Aksho, M, Bibby F. and Bloxburg, and Melancholy Geek. And an extra special thank you to those of you donating at my highest paid tiers, The Nth Review and James Wyatt. Now, if you'd like to keep what few lights I have on, you should join these folks at patreon.com/midnightmedium, or become a YouTube channel member, or donate at Ko-fi or PayPal. Also, check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to support me with no extra cost to you. And if you aren't tired of me yet, check me out as I join Deadforge and Robert Yap in the Quad Damage podcast, where we talk first-person shooters with developers and content creators alike. God bless you, everyone, and I'll see you soon.